Hello everyone, welcome to, this is a regularly scheduled API review session. How unusual. We have fewer red things, and we may actually get to non-red things today. That'll be exciting. But first up, dealing with the red, AVX VNNI intrinsics, issue 43780. Is that you, Tanner?
Yep. So our friends at, as the title says, our friends at Intel are going to be shipping some new instructions. They would like for us to expose those instructions. That way, users, particularly in the machine learning area, can take advantage of them. Proposed classes AVX VNNI, following the underlying ISA name, inheriting from AVX2, which is the required base ISA, and then following the general naming pattern we had already landed on for ARM64. So multiply, widening, and add, for example.
Okay, since we're all going to just gloss over on this, it's actually very short, but
Are they really only integers, or am I missing?
Yes.
Is there? Yeah.
Yep. In particular, most of the so it's only integers in that they return integral values, but they do take byte or short for the base type, depending on which one you want. And in particular, they do a widen and then add to a 32-bit integral and return a 32-bit integral result.
So all the ones with byte, you seem to have unsigned byte left and signed byte right.
Correct.
Okay.
The actual instruction deals with the types in that way.
But for short, it's signed?
I believe that's the case. That last one might actually be a typo. Let me double check there.
Because I see short going to int, but then byte s byte, and so it's a parity seems to not match.
I don't actually have this doc down. We could probably just leave it as we should double check that the type is correct.
Fair enough.
And follow whatever the instruction set says.
And then just redundantly asking questions. There's not a 64-bit add-in version of these instructions?
Correct.
Or if it is, it's in a different existing instruction set? Okay. And are all of the particles existing things, like saturate and widening?
Yes, those all follow the Intel originally proposed other names, and then Igor and I asked them to parody the names we decided on these for ARM.
Okay. I'm out of questions. Anybody else? Going once?
What does VNNI stand for?
Vector Neural Net Interface.
Okay.
Something like that.
Going twice? Sold.
So the only question I have is, Tanner, when do you bring the next 5,000 APIs from Hunter Intrinsic?
Whenever we decide AVX 512 or SV or ARM SVE is worth implementing.
Okay, but not for 6 then? Is that so I don't have to brace myself another round of
Right,
hundreds of APIs?
we're not planning on doing anything for 6 here.
Okay.
Oh.
And yes, it is specifically multiply and add unsigned and signed bytes.
But unsigned and unsigned shorts.
Yes.
Fair enough. All right. A runtime API to return hot reload capabilities. Issue 50111.
Yep. So this is follow-up to the managed apply update API that we added. So the general setup for hot reload is that a tool like .NET Watch is running at the same time as your app, and whenever you make some changes to your code, Roslyn is invoked to generate an edit and continue delta that then is transferred to the running app, and it applies it, and everybody's happy. So the question then is, like, what kind of update should Roslyn generate? Like, what are the supported edits? And that sort of depends on the runtime. It depends on if you're running .NET framework or if you're running .NET 6 with like Core CLR or with Mono. So Core CLR and Mono might have different capabilities. So we need some way for the runtime to say, here's what I actually support, so that Roslyn can react and generate the appropriate kind of delta. So the API proposal is just return a flat string that Roslyn understands. And what exactly that is to be determined by Roslyn and the runtimes. But the one thing that I threw in there is that if it returns empty string, then you don't get to do any edits, and so Roslyn will just say it's not supported.
So
one question I have is, like, why is this a string returning API? Isn't that a static description of what the runtime can do?
It's not necessarily. So Mono, depending on the execution engine that it's using, can either support edits or not. So if it's using the interpreter, then some edits are supported. If it's using something else, then it's not.
And there are enough of these of different types that it wouldn't make sense to have like a bunch of bool properties here.
No, because we want, we don't know exactly upfront what we want, the granularity that we want. So that kind of depends on what the Roslyn folks decide they'd like to know about.
Yeah. So everything that's currently in runtime feature is, while it's technically a string, it's all just if it's declared, it exists. There's nothing that anything calls into runtime features to ask a question for. It's if the compiler sees the thing, then it's allowed to use it, and if it doesn't, then it's not. It's all about targeting pack, despite the fact that we called it runtime. So I wonder, and this is really a question for Emo, of do we need to put this somewhere else, or are we expanding the definition of that class?
Yeah, so to give some background, so the runtime feature thing was originally designed to let the compiler statically know what they can assume the runtime has, right? So that's why we have these fields. Now we also added two properties. Is dynamic code compiled and is dynamic code is supported, because we don't have the one true way across all our runtimes, right? So all the other things are kind of designed to be cumulative, right? .NET 5 has 6 runtime features and .NET 7 has 9, and it's an ever-growing set, right? So for things that are, different across our runtimes, we basically went with the Boolean returning property, where you at runtime can ask, well, if I generate code, is it going to be fast, right? Or first of all, can I generate code at runtime? And if I can, is it going to be compiled or interpreted, basically, right? And so that's why we have these two bool properties there as well. So I think for better or worse, I think we have both patterns on this type already. And I think that what you're describing here is like, to me, it's either one of two things. Either we say there's a static description that we think we can do, or we say, no, it's not static because different runtimes have different capabilities and we need to differentiate them. And the expectation is you query them at runtime. I'm fine with that too. I think what I wouldn't do is kind of the way you propose it here, because it kind of seems like you have this backdoor now, but you say, well, we have the string returning thing. We will figure out what we return there. And it's some semi-structured data payload here that somebody else can interpret, right? And that's kind of the, it's almost like an object returning API where you're saying like, well, we still figure out what object we're returning here. Like, we make up our mind as we go. That seems a bit, like an open-ended backdoor almost. And so I'm wondering, like, if you already know kind of here the 3 or 4 things that may or may not be available, can we just make them, either one or multiple Boolean returning properties that browsing can query for, right? I think that would be a better model probably than a string returning API, because at the end of the day, like, if you think you save time by not having to spec what that string is, that's not going to happen, right? Because if you have an API that has behavior, we are kind of as bound by this behavior as we would be with a Boolean property as well, right? So you're just making it slightly harder for consuming parties to understand what the return really means.
Okay. So I think there are two sort of comments. So one is having individual properties for individual edits. I'm not sure that we necessarily want that. Just because the scenario is that these are two separate processes, so we have to serialize something anyway. So we have to design, essentially the string representation of this thing anyway. The other is that for future .NET runtimes, we could imagine adding additional capabilities as, Core CLR supports more kinds of edits than it does today, which means we'd have to, sort of come back and add additional properties, or if there's an enum that defines these things, add additional enum values. And I'm wondering if that's, a viable strategy, or since we need to serialize this thing anyway, if it's...
Yeah, I don't quite understand the serialization thing, because it seems like it's still you're describing capabilities, right? So, realistically, this could be, in a flags-based enum, assuming 32 bits are enough for you, right? Or, literally 32 different properties would probably be a bit overkill, but so, I mean, that would probably what I would do. I would say, like, in the beginning, we support 6 things. We put it in enum, and then Core CLR has 5 on, one has 6 on, or whatever the case might be, right? And then that's the thing you can query from Roslyn. That's probably what I would do. And then as we discover more capabilities, we add more enum members to that thing that you can now query for.
Okay.
I mean, it seems like what you need to serialize is the actual edit, right? Not the description of what edits you're supporting, right?
We need both. So the setup is that the app is running, and it includes some hot reload manager, which is the thing that's accepting the edits from Roslyn. And Roslyn is running in a separate process. And the first thing when both of these things start up is Roslyn would query the running app and ask, what kind of edits are you supporting? And so that has to go over a communication channel, and that's where the serialization is occurring.
Gotcha. I mean, if we go with an enum, I mean, that would be trivial, right? It's just, it's a 32-bit invader. Just marshal across the project boundary, the process boundary. That seems fine.
We can even make it 64-bit just because we're the only caller.
Yeah, that's also true. I mean, it's not that I'm against strings, right? It's just that it just, instead of designing an API now you design a language that just kind of pushes the can down the road a little bit. So that's why I'm kind of hesitant to say, yeah, let's just approve this API, because it seems like it's not clear what the string return value is, right? So if I try to understand if I'm not, yeah, realistically this API is for Roslyn, right? But we still try to have APIs that we can describe to people, right? And if we say, yeah, there's this, subsection in the ECMAR 335 specification that says, here's the string the runtime needs to return in order for somebody else to do edits, and it's a 400-page doc. That might be worse, right? So like if you can just say, here's a 32-bit value, here's what these values mean, because chances are somebody else will query those things, but probably they're only interested in some subset, right? You could imagine an AOT framework or something else that wants to participate in the rebuild or something that needs to know whether certain things are supported or not, right? So even if we design this API for Roslyn, we should probably still make sure that it's somewhat reasonable in terms of what can we explain the API in like 2 paragraphs or something.
Okay.
But it should be, if I don't know, like, may I understand the edits now, it's still somewhat continuation of what ENC could do, right? So it's still pretty much 12 or 13 different capabilities is probably sufficient to describe it, right?
Yes. Initially, we're going to have to describe the things that Mono can't do, and that might be a longer list.
That's also viable, right? If you look at the runtime feature thing in general, like, they haven't really added anything that everybody already supports, right? So for example, generics, would probably would have been one of those fields you would have added if this type would have been around since V1, right? But we only focused on things that we added at the time we added the type. So yeah, focusing on the differences as a first step is probably the right thing, because that's where most of the value is anyway. But yeah, I guess we have to think about what it means if, the generating runtime and the running runtime have different versions, right? Because, the tooling version will go in a different cadence than the user code, right? And it could be higher or lower depending on how it goes. So I guess, yeah, we need to kind of think about what the return value is so we can marshal it, but I think an int is, or a long is probably sufficient, because even if new flags show up, it just becomes a handshake issue where you say, do you know what it means if bit number 33 is said, right?
Bit 64 is go ask the other property. Yeah, so this is basically what I heard from the
yeah. Pretty much.
Yeah, and that matches. That matches what Roslyn has internally, essentially. I can probably dig up the PR where they implemented it. But yeah, we just wanted to propose coming in with a string just because then we don't have to talk about, there's this thing and then we have to serialize it. But yeah, that's.
You kind of have to talk about it. It's just that you no longer talk about it in terms of APIs, now you're talking in terms of documentation, right? So it's just, and our next question is then what's the string format, right? So it's just, I don't know, it just seems like we're just avoiding the conversation. That's actually interesting.
Yeah, it just changes which group of people you have to have the conversation with, and once we get the infrastructure in place, I don't think this group will actually care what names you use, other than if it's a complex mixture of Snake and Pascal case, then we may get a little touchy, but
bunch of goods. Why do you care what they are? Yeah, I think that was kind of Jan's feedback too, right? If I remember correctly, right? On the yeah, I think he's I just realized, like, he asked more or less the same question what I was asking. Why can't we just do a flags enum for that? Yeah, the other thing we can do is basically so the runtime feature thing, we also have this is supported API. So the idea here was, imagine you're compiled against version 5, but then you want to optimize for a case where you may run on version 6 or 7 of the runtime. So you say, I'm aware of the later versions of the runtime. And then you can just say, okay, I know which fields might be present in this type, and I can just choose the name of the field and ask at runtime. And the idea here was basically things like code generators, where you would emit different C# code for the runtime you're running on, and you just basically ask those at runtime. But I think for your scenario, like, I think just a regular property that returns a bit mask is probably sufficient. I mean, it's a bit complicated now because the question is, is supported also work for that? So we could have a contract that says when you take this enum mask and you pass it to a supported, we also tell you whether it's supported or not. But like, I think at that point it just becomes moot. You already have a dynamic API. It gives you back a bit mask, and well, you just if you compile against version 5, you may not have the enum members, but you know what the values are when you look at version 6 or 7 of the runtime. So I think that's sufficient as a light-up story.
All right.
Yeah,
Sounds
I mean,
good.
yeah, certainly with the flags approach, you can get the compact version of asking for the flags and having as long as, especially if we use the same enum, semantic values between Roslyn and the runtime, then that gives Roslyn a super easy way to map things in. But yeah, I mean, the implementation of is supported. Like in here, it would just end up with case name of assembly update features dot runtime edits return enum dot is bit set or whatever it's called has flag of the existing thing. So it would just be case each of those other names, and yeah, or we could decide we don't care for the is supported on those things, but we probably would. But.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think needs work and suggest the enum.
Makes sense.
Yep. What does Jan mean by the last comment? Is the idea that based on the capabilities you may do more aggressive trimming?
I think that was about the special case of the empty string, meaning nothing is supported, and then you can aggressively trim based on that. So in the case where it's some runtime that you just statically know won't support any edits at all, you can remove the entire hot reload manager, or if you have a toolkit that reacts to edits.
I mean, presumably when you're editing an app, like, the linker will still pretty much retain everything, right? Because otherwise bad things might happen, right? No? Or are we still trimming in this case?
Right. It's a question of a framework like Maui, for example, where they might want to have support code so that they can refresh. When an edit comes in, they want to refresh the UI.
Gotcha.
But if they know statically that everything will never get edits, then all of that code can be dropped out. But I think there's going to be a separate proposal for that.
Yeah, that's an interesting question though, right? Because those are not runtime capabilities at that point. It becomes more like what what is your publishing profile, right? Like, what do you want the resulting app to be still do at runtime, right? It's kind of like retain debug information or not, right? The runtime has support for it, but you may decide that you want to link all of that stuff out because you don't want to pay for it, right?
Yeah.
Today we've been tying it to the debugger is supported feature switch. And then that's what the issue that Jan was pointing to says is basically, should we separate it and have a hot reload supported separate from debugger is supported feature switch?
I mean, it's an interesting question though, because I think once you have such an app, plus the app at runtime, you know, what capabilities do you have? It should probably reflect what is actually available at runtime, right? So if you linked all that stuff out, then ideally the return value at runtime is, sorry, I don't support any edits, right?
Right. Especially for like
Blazor,
right? For like Blazor WASM, we hope that when you publish your final app, all the reload stuff will be taken out, even of the runtime, right? Because it's in your published app, you're never going to use it, so it might as well go away.
Right.
Yep.
Makes sense.
All right. Apparently, supported OS platform and unsupported OS platform now need some new guards. 51541 emo.
No, I think Guya needs to talk to this one.
Yeah. So there is existing methods in libraries for platform and OS version check, which is recognized by the flow analysis of platform compatibility analyzer and used for evaluating the context if the reference platform specific API is safe to call or if the analyzer needs to warn for it. But the analyzer for now not support the cached values for platform check, like in the field or property or helper methods. So we want to add such support. For that, we need a separate attribute for annotating those fields or helper methods with that, and which will be recognized by the analyzer in flow analysis and help with guarding the call.
So I'm guessing you would use this to annotate like a foo.isWindows, and then the analyzer would just realize that if you've checked that, then it doesn't need to give you warnings.
Yeah, if check that what platform it's guarding, and then if the calling method is safe to call, then not warn. For now, we cannot use any custom guards and except the existing libraries methods like OS platform check, OS platform operating system that is OS platform kind of methods.
So do we need? So it feels like supported OS platform guard is if a Boolean returns true, then the OS is supported, and unsupported is if it returns false, it's unsupported.
Not well.
Because I'm looking at the sample here.
It will work like exactly for this example. For example, in this case, the guard is start supported will be work just like it's used. There is a operating system that is always is browser, but with the not in front. So in the else case means it will be browser per se.
Right. So the unsupported attribute says it's unsupported if the property returns false, and the supported guard says the platform is supported if the property returns true.
Is it that,
yes.
or is it like the current OS platform attribute, or the current supported versus unsupported, that it kind of combines them into a list of things that are supported. Like you could say it's not supported on Windows, and then you say, but it's supported on Windows 10 20H2.
I mean, sort of,
You
right? I
mean
mean, the way I understand is that basically is that you can define your own methods and basically declaratively say what they will tell you, right?
yes,
So
and
rather,
it can support the version 2, but because the existing attributes for supported and unsupported attributes does like different things. I mean, like for example, supported will only say the API is only supported on this API, but not supported for all other. But unsupported OS platform attribute will say like it's only support for the unsupported on this platform, but supported for all other. It's like not exactly same thing, not exactly opposite thing. I mean, so that's why I need different guard attributes for those. I cannot use same one for.
Can you scroll down, Jeremy? I think the next code sample is a bit more instructive. Like, so imagine you have a method like is Windows 10 or above, right? So we already have, operating system is Windows, right? But many people have their own guard methods already, right? So now with this attribute, you can say, well, this method provides a guard check. And so that when we see a call to it, we know that if this thing returns true, then it was Windows 10 or higher, right? And so that in that sense, it's not the same as the supported OS platform attribute, right? The supported OS platform attribute says the caller is responsible for checking, versus these news attributes are saying this method performs this check, right? And you can reason about what this thing will tell you.
Yeah, I'll give Frederick some credit from the YouTube chat, even though I was already thinking the same thing. I feel like what we want is to let the caller or let the person who's painting it indicate what the Boolean means instead of pre-associate the meaning. So basically supports OS platform win. So for HTTP3 enabled, it would be supports OS platform when true, comma, Linux. So if we return true, then Linux is supported. And that lets you, if for some reason you end up opposite of the current meanings, you don't have to go replace all of your semantics. Like, I agree with it being Boolean, but since it's an attribute, the true and false have to be declared inline, and therefore everything's like, all we need to do is open up that one tiny little valve, and we gained 2 free attributes out of this.
The way I was thinking about it is modeling it off of nullable attributes, which the wording that you used was exactly the same, right? The win.
Frederick had pointed out maybe null win.
Right.
And then you specify under what condition the maybe null attribute really applied.
I mean, that works for me. I mean, it's basically you're just collapsing the 2 attributes into one. I think that's fine.
No, because there's supports and I don't know what to call the unsupports, but...
You mean only use one attribute with true false value illustrating support or unsupport? Boolean value for that, or
well,
yeah, we would have OS platform guard or supports. Yeah, I guess supported OS platform when or whatever, right? And then the first argument is the bool that says true or false, and then the second one is the OS platform string, right?
Yeah. So.
Yeah, like that.
But I don't know. I don't know that being false means it's unsupported. Like.
Yeah, does that mean unsupported or else we don't need to have Boolean value there?
Well, the difference is like you have is Windows 10 or above, right? And so that could be.
It's just expected by default is true per se.
Right. So this would be. If it returns true, then you know you're at least Windows 10. But if it returns false, that doesn't necessarily mean anything. But then that would let you, if the existing code you'd already written had is below Windows 10, then you would just say, oh, if I return false, that means I'm Windows 10 or better. So this only gives the positive support. The negative support, I don't know if we would infer it from the negative statement or if we would want a separate attribute that I don't know how to name.
I would hope that these are
think
used. Go ahead, Booyah.
I think it should be like just work same as existing attributes, like for example, supported OS platform or unsupported OS platform attributes, which are just means like it's above and higher. And
Right. I'm just saying right now you've made the decision that for the yes, I support this, that's when it returns true. And right now, if this returns false, I assume you're not changing your truth table in any way. Like you're not learning I'm not Linux. You're just not learning I am Linux. Versus the unsupported attribute where you showed here, it's assuming that if this returns false, then I've learned I'm not this platform. And that's... I just wonder if we should put the Boolean in there so that the caller can control which direction it's going.
I
Do
think
we
it would
worry
be
that the
great to
Boolean
mimic-
logic?
I think these should work similar, if not exactly the same, as the existing supported OS platform attributes. Otherwise, this is going to be very confusing to find out how to combine these two to work together.
yes, and the existing OS platform guard methods also like work this way, so it just should be like more easier to apply it into the analyzer.
Well, but we only have the current guard members are ones that we've predefined, that we know that returning true implies a particular thing. I don't know that we have any that tells you that you're in an unsupported or on an unsupported OS now. And maybe we don't even want that. Like maybe this is the wrong model, but probably not. I'm just saying right now you're assuming that someone who's written their own code has true, meaning they have a thing, and that false would imply an unsupported. And maybe that'll hold true 99% of the time. I just feel that if we added the Boolean to what's already proposed here, that it doesn't really complicate the flow analyzer and means that we don't need to go add support for unsupported OS platform guard negative behavior of like they really need it to be it's unsupported if true, and
Yeah.
So regardless
Can you
of the
explain?
programming logic, oh, sorry, I want to agree with
No.
Corey. Like adding like the true false there, like whether or not it's trackable from a programming perspective, like just looking at the HTTP3 example where you have like multiple attributes, like if you combine true and false, it's just hard for me to reason about as a programmer. And I haven't heard a use case where like the false case is super useful yet.
Yeah, for this example, what if there's all three different platforms having different like true files, and then just I don't know what to do with that.
Yeah, can you explain what? So I understand what it means when you have supported OS platform.
No, I mean
guard on it.
if it had the true false option, I mean the another attribute, I mean another parameter, then and then we have this supported on Linux, Mac OS, Windows, and then if they have different true false values, then what they should understand or what the analyzer should do with that, like it will be very difficult to match them or
So Jeremy, I think what you're saying is that you just want to enable someone to be able to write a negative property name.
Yeah.
So instead of Windows 10 or above, you'd say is not Windows 10 or above, and we want to enable that.
Right. Well,
Or is HTTP3 disabled?
yeah. Like it's just a question of what makes sense for somebody's current API and code that they're already trying to wire up. And because if we have the thing that only has the supported guard means it's supported when you return true, and the unsupported guard means it's unsupported when you return false, then we may force people to go rewrite their code just to get this negative assertion statement. When the whole point of this feature is they don't have to go rewrite their code in terms of the API we already support.
Isn't this already handling HB3 disabled though? Like, I don't see why we need to add stuff to support that. That's the else clause.
Did you see the PR?
No, so maybe I'm
Oh.
missing something.
The PR, like in the code already, we have HTTP3 enabled checks everywhere. And in the PR to turn on the platform analyzer, we had to go also add all the operating system is Linux or Windows or Mac in all those places as well, just to make the analyzer happy.
I see.
I do think Booyah raised an interesting point. What happens if you put true for some and false for others? It seems like you want this to have the same kind of composability of the current attributes.
It seems obvious to me. It's when it returns true, apply the following support things into your statement. If it returns false, apply these different set of things into your statement.
You see, but that's, I think, but I'm still not sure. So for unsupported, I understand what it means, but I still don't understand what unsupported platform guard would mean. So let's say, take the HTTP3 and enable thing. Now let's say we replace all support OS platform guard with unsupported OS platform guard. What does this field mean?
It means operating system, not Linux and not Windows and not Mac OS.
So it switches from and to or based on whether it's true or false.
Based on the if supported OS platform list or unsupported platform list.
Right, yeah, my bad. Makes sense.
How about instead of supported and unsupported, it's more like is OS platform when true, false, whatever, and then you list the platforms.
Yeah, I mean, the thinking about this, especially in this case, this is weird because you can't really push Windows into the known OS's state because you know you're one of Windows, Mac, or Linux, but you don't know which one. And so now you can't now call a Mac OS only API. Like, are we handling that?
No, in that case it will be warning, because it can be Linux or Windows, not only Mac OS.
Because the set of possible operating systems you are at this point is more than one, so you need all of them to be asserted? Okay.
Yeah, in case the referencing API has all of the supported attributes, then it should work. But if it has only one of them or two of them, then it will be warning, even the condition was true.
You have to assert a superset, right? So you can assert more, but you can't assert less. Sorry, you can't. You can assert less, but you cannot have more, basically. So it's a subset, I guess. Right. So for example, if HTTP3 enabled would have also had supported OS platform guard Unix, then you would get a warning at this case because the API is not supported.
No, that case will not warn.
Wouldn't you? If up here said
because
these three or browser, and this one down here says only these three, you could have been browser.
Right.
Yeah, that case it will warn, but
yeah,
the opposite will not warn.
You have to check for the supportedness appropriately, so you couldn't just say, well, now I can call all my Mac OS APIs. You would still have to check to see if you're on Mac OS through some other property.
Yeah, basically the APIs you can call have to be supported for all the operating systems that you statically know are reachable, right? Which in our case is 3. So the API can be supported on more, but the API can't be supported on less, right? So that's that's why I'm still mentally struggling with the inverse of that. I guess, yeah, that's the way unsupported works, right? So basically it's the same thing. You just track the ones that you know are unsupported. And so now when you call an API that explicitly is unsupported for any of the things you know you might be running on, you get a warning as well. But I guess in terms of composability, they will not compose the same way as supported OS platform does, because supported OS platform, the question is, you can model it over time, right? You can say this API was introduced in Windows 10 and then removed in Windows 12. And so you started with supported OS platform, and then later on you added unsupported OS platform. I don't think the guards would work like that, or would they? Can I actually say supported OS platform got Windows 10 and then say unsupported OS platform got Windows 12?
I haven't exactly tried that situation, but even with the existing guard methods, that checking for that condition is kind of difficult. I hope we can cover that too, though.
I feel like that. I would say that has to be supported. If this works differently from supported OS platform, how that composes, it's just going to be impossible to reason about.
Yeah, I mean, I think we don't have to implement it necessarily if we don't believe we need it, but I think we need to decide what semantics these attributes are supposed to have. And I kind of agree with what Corey is saying. Like, I mean, given the naming and given the structure, it just makes sense to say they are mirrors of supported OS platform. And so they would have to have the same logic, right?
But yeah, I mean, I own the screen, so I get to doodle. To me, this makes sense. Let's just say we put a Boolean in the current one. If this property evaluates as true, then you know you're you do know that you're Mac OS or Linux, and you do know that you're not iOS. You don't know anything about browser, and you don't know anything about Windows. Like, you just don't learn anything about those. It's not guaranteed by the state. And if it returns false, then you know you're not browser, and you know you're if it returns false, you know that browser API won't work, and if it returns false, iOS API won't work.
Can we mix in some supersets and subsets, right? So, like, I support Windows 10, but I don't support Windows 10 greater than certain version, because that's things that people do, right?
And so
I don't understand, like, Jeremy, have both supported and unsupported and the Boolean? I thought the idea was to have a Boolean to get rid of unsupported.
No, it's the Boolean says, if I return true, then add Linux into the OSs that I might be. If I return false, you don't learn anything about Linux. And then this one says, if I return true, you have learned I'm not iOS.
But then what if I say I support iOS greater than a certain version after I say I don't support iOS in general?
Then that would be the same rules as supported and unsupported, and how bigger versions apply over lower versions, and etc. So it's just, if it returns true, then apply this into the same as if I called OS platform, or not OS platform is iOS.
So the bool isn't there to tell you supported or unsupported. It's just allowing you to also communicate support or not support when the bool returns false.
Right. It's activate this attribute when this Boolean has this value. I don't think that you would really do this complicated of painting on HTTP3 enabled, but certainly I can see we had a lot of code in framework is Win9x, right? Which meant I'm Win9x and not Win2k or higher. It was the am I old check. And since we wrote a lot of am I old checks, I can see a lot of people writing am I old checks. And then that means they want they want complicated behavior, and they wrote negative logic compared to what this guard is currently proposed as.
So
sorry. So what the fourth attribute means, like support OS platform, guard to false, and browser.
Right. If it returns false, then browser, or you might be running on browser.
So if it returns false, you apply every attribute that says false.
Yeah.
If it returns true, you apply every attribute that says true.
Yeah.
What is supported?
So I think.
Well, for me, it's just make more complication.
Well, but right now you
Well, it
have
makes sense, but still,
yeah, you have the notion that if it has supported from the current proposal, if it has supported OS platform guard, that means gain this state when it returns true. And for unsupported, you said gain this state when it returns false. I'm just saying move that true and false instead of a hard-coded answer to another attribute parameter.
no, I mean, unsupported is not by default means false. I mean, if unsupported OS platform
That's
browser,
how you showed it here.
It's not browser. In the true case, it means it's not browser. I mean, it's not supported on browser.
So I think there are two things, right? Supported and unsupported and true and false are similar. The problem is supported is an or and unsupported is an and. And therefore, like, it's not exactly the same as flipping true false here. But the problem I have with this isn't that you can't make the logic work programmatically. I'm sure you can. It's that I don't want to read that. Like, as a programmer, if you really want to change true or false, then like invert the logic of your bool and use nots in your program, and it'll make everyone's life easier.
I mean, that is 100% an aesthetic style, right? Like, there's if is when 9x throw, that totally makes sense to people. That means that there's a bunch of established is when 9x already in your code. And now saying is win 2k or higher, that's inverting all of your logic, and you have to, I mean, yes, if you delete the old name, then the compiler will help you find all of them, but it's because we came up with this guard suggestion, we're forcing you to write your code in a particular manner, and my suggestion is add the Boolean here, and it lets people write code however they want.
So one thing that Jeremy's idea might enable is you could have like an is Unicode or something for Windows support, and if it's true, you'd call the Unicode API. If it's false, you would call the multi-byte encoded API, and that would just work. You wouldn't need two checks, because it would tell you what's supported if it returns true and what's supported if it returns false.
And why can't you do that without the true false?
Yeah, that's
because without the true false, you would say if Unicode do this, and then under that you'd have to say else if multi-byte do this. So you would need to have an extra check.
But ultimately, like, all Jeremy's thing adds, as far as I understand, is you can invert the bool. Like, so if you just invert the bool in your program, it doesn't stop you from doing anything. It's a style thing, like Jeremy said. Like, you might not want to change your entire program. If you wanted to, you could have two bools that are always the opposite of each other and use one for the guard and the other in your program.
Well, but you can't, because the analyzer will see that you called a thing it doesn't understand, no guard information is loaded, and you get your warnings back.
But you could have like a property that like inverts the bool or something, right? Like, you could do something in your program,
but you can't.
Just kind of hides
It's
that.
not gonna inline the property to find out that you have now a negative guard statement. It just sees that as a completely unrelated statement. That's the purpose of the guard.
So you're a little more straitjacketed in how you write your program then. Okay.
And we can make the Boolean be an optional second parameter, and basically people will only do it when they want to say I wrote my thing backwards so the default thing looks shorter or whatever. It just feels to me like we shouldn't assert that people are writing only positive assertions. Sometimes they write negative/old assertions.
In that case, we need to change the EOS platform browser or something like that, those methods having Boolean value, which will illustrate what you want. Well, but what you were saying.
But those are already hard-coded as to what they mean. And they would be the same as saying OS platform browser true. Like, when I return true, I am browser.
Yeah, I mean, it should be, the annotation should be same as how it's the existing form analysis work.
I mean, my question is like, I think I understand now Jeremy's proposal. My question is this a problem that we are likely encountering? Because my understanding is that basically what this allows us to do is say, if you have feature check code, like is thread start support or whatever, what Booyah's feature allows is to say, well, if this returns true, here's what you know about the platform support matrix, right? And it seems inherently positive. Like it doesn't seem likely that somebody has is no threat supported, right? Because you need to have a negative Boolean effectively in order to run into the need to say, I need to indicate what returning false means. Versus if we assume that all feature flags are inherently positive, then you only ever need to describe what true means. You never have to describe what false means.
I think that works for our own APIs. We probably want them to be positive, but that's kind of our own style. Should we enforce our style on everyone writing C#?
No, I guess what I'm saying
if that's what we're deciding.
It's a bit more fundamental, right? Because Booleans are usually named into positive. There's very few examples where somebody has a Boolean property that is inherently a negative.
Well,
it's just a rare way to do it.
I feel, at least in framework back, because core never ran on Win9x. There was a lot of is Win9x, and what that really meant was if I'm not in T4, aka I'm not Windows 2000 or Windows XP, and that was then if I'm Win9x throw, and that was written all over the place, which is essentially a negative feature. It's if this is true, features don't work.
No, it's not.
Well, that's how it was written.
No, but if you say is Win9x, the check is literally, are you running on Windows 9? Like, are you running on Windows, and if you're running on Windows 9 or higher, right? And so that by definition excludes every other platform.
Fair enough.
But that's the whole feature of what it means to check for an OS. It's always the one you mentioned, and everything else is implicitly unsupported, right? Versus unsupported is basically saying I run everywhere except for the ones that are listed.
So is Win9x, take my doodle window back. If we, without the Boolean, so I think, Booyah corrected me that unsupported means if it's true, it's not supported. So Win9x would be
Yeah, I'm actually now convinced myself that we don't need the Boolean.
I think we all agree you don't need it from a technical perspective. It's more of a...
So I think it's that.
Yeah, except we wouldn't write it like that.
Yeah, there is inconsistency. Oh.
Well, this is the... Because what this was saying is start returning false once I hit NT, or the NT4 line, which I think was called Windows 6.
So it would mean...
It was
5. Yeah. Because 6 was Vista, and 5 was XP and 2K, and 4 was Windows NT. Yes. But this is how we used it in Framework. It meant I'm not the NT-derived OS family. I'm the old and crappy window manager that no one liked.
Well, I think the calling this is important to understand how you used it. So are you saying that you would say if not is Win9x do some Unicode thing?
I feel that most of the time it was if is Win9x throw. And it was just when, like, a thing added as a preamble and a bunch of things of like, oh, I use Windows NT API. And it wasn't written as is XP or later. It was written as if I'm the old thing, the list of unsupported stuff's never going to grow. And so I think it was all written as if this throw.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like in that case, we would just be using true for both those bools anyway.
That's fair.
Right?
In that case, just we'll use the same attributes with the guard.
Oh, yeah. Sorry, I meant
suffix and
guard.
So I guess the main thing about just always having it be true is that we are enforcing our views on, yes, you should have positive named booleans.
Right. Because for the like threading, right? Like here we have is thread start supported, right? It could be is single threaded. That's a positive assertion, but it's actually a negative assertion of is multi-threaded, or is there multi-threaded support?
So I think I understand now what Jeremy is saying, but like if you look at the API is Win9x, what it really is Win9x or older, right? So basically you're checking into the past, basically, right? And we don't have this concept in the like there's no idiomatic way you can use our platform compat analyzer and have them understand that logic. Like ignore the guard pattern for a second at all, right? So like if you just look at we don't have checker APIs for that, right? We like you if you want to use idiomatic code, you would have to have a method called is NT or newer, and then you would have to say if not NT or newer, throw. There's no way you can write is Win9x or older today, right? And so the guard pattern that Julia is proposing isn't solving that problem either, right? It's basically just saying, given that we have always, this version or later checks in our code base, how can you indicate that this method performs that check, right? But it doesn't fundamentally change the way the checks are being expressed. And I think the Boolean wouldn't do that either, because the Boolean, like I would have to sit down, but I'm actually kind of concerned that if we would give you the Boolean, that you can run into errors in the authoring way because now you're describing both true and false, that you can describe things that are inconsistent, if that makes sense.
That's fair.
Because the problem fundamentally is both supported and unsupported make a statement over the things that aren't returned, right, or that aren't checked, right? So if you say something is unsupported, then the assumption is everything that you haven't said is unsupported is implicitly assumed to be supported, right? That's the way unsupported works, right? Or if you say supported, well, then everything that you haven't mentioned is implicitly unsupported, right? So and now if you allow the caller to indicate what true or false means, I think you might get into cases where those things no longer compose, because now the author is saying, yeah, I said that, but now I'm giving you the alternative truth table for the other three platforms, and now you get into logical inconsistencies.
That's fair. I mean, like it was, that we're assuming or we're asserting a model, but if you believe that the current support attributes are already locked into that kind of model, then we're at least consistent.
Well, we have certainly shipped it like that, right? Yeah. I mean, if we would, you could imagine a world where we expose new APIs like is Windows version or older, right? Well, where you could do the Win9x check in a sound way, but then I don't know whether we can craft attributes that make us allowed to implement that without our heads exploding, because it's already complicated with that version.
Well, my recollection is that, if we had an API that only worked on WinX, get rid of the word guards here, and that's exactly how it would work. Because my recollection is if the lowest thing says supported, then now you're describing the only cases that it works, and then the higher unsupported says it stopped working at this point, unless we got rid of that from the feature.
No, that is correct. So like you can attribute effectively that this API stopped being supported in the Windows version. What you can't do today is there's no way you can author the guard clause using a positive, right? So there's no way for you to, you would have to say if is not, NT or higher, throw, right? Because basically you have to check for the next higher version and then negate it. That's the only way you can do
right.
Is older, right?
Because then that would be saying if I'm not supported, because your is supported of the positive statement. And like that's where it just gets weird of things where you can talk about the limiting behavior in a positive spin of is single threaded. And is single threaded is not multi-threaded, because multi-threaded is the new shiny feature that you can't use. And it means that we may force people to rewrite all of their logic just to play with the guard, but maybe that's fine.
I mean, sort of. It's more the inverse, right? Basically, like multi-threading is supported everywhere, except for browser, and that's all this attribute is basically saying. So if this is returning true, you know that this is running on all platforms except browser.
I think so. An example to use the is single threaded concept. For methods that can only be called if you're multi-threaded, then you would have to also have an is multi-threaded property somewhere. And if you wanted to, if you had a code path that could either do single-threaded or multi-threaded, depending on what your platform supported, you would have to do if is single-threaded, call my single-threaded thing, else if is multi-threaded, call my multi-threaded thing. If you have the bool, you don't need to do that. You can get rid of the second if, because it can communicate that multi-threaded is now supported.
I don't see how the bool does that. Like, again, the bool, you can get the same logic just by inverting the actual field. Like, it doesn't give you any new capabilities, if I'm understanding what Jeremy is suggesting. Like, it just changes how you write the code.
Yeah, but like, okay, but let's take this thing here. Let's just rename the field from is thread supported or to is thread part unsupported. How would you attribute that thing? Because you can't just say, now I put supported OS platform browser on it, because that's not true, right? Like every platform can be single threaded. It's just that browser can't be multi-threaded, right? So like you can't just invert the field. Without the boolean, you have no way to attribute that effectively, right?
Well, are you suggesting it's doing
I'm
something different than what Jeremy
okay.
said? Because Jeremy, correct me if I'm wrong, but you just said it would just interpret it as if the bool like was inverted, right? Like if the field you are attributing was inverted. That's all that means.
Yeah, I mean, like it. So I think that there is, if we think that the adding the boolean makes it too complex to use, I think that there's a minor gap, and we are being minorly opinionated on how people should write their code. Certainly, when it comes to public API, not the analyzer flow here. We have said we want positive assertions, and we generally want assertions that only get more true over time. Again, assuming you're on Windows, that once you've met a minimum Windows version, we hope that functionality doesn't go away. But certainly, as anybody who likes using advanced settings in Windows knows, Windows does like removing functionality. Historically not from API, though. But so we can say that we wrote the guards, or the existing support is done as basically positive assertion, and we do have the unsupported, but it's a positive anti-support, and that we want the guards to be, when it's true, you've learned this stuff, and we don't have a, if it's false, you've learned stuff, and yep, invert your logic. Change your is single-threaded only to supports multi-threading and deal with it. Or don't use the analyzer.
Yeah, that would be my preference. I mean, because I have to be honest, like I can't even visualize whether it's sound to have the boolean.
The bool makes sense to me, but I think that the positive returns are so much more typical that we can add the bool later.
Yeah, I think it's at least 95% of cases would be saying when true. So, like, I think that our maybe null win, that like at least 95% of the cases are false. But we went ahead and left ourselves the flexibility to say maybe you have a, if this is true, null can come out. And so we went ahead and left it, but maybe we don't need it here, and yeah, we can add it later.
Yeah. But maybe null is also a single instance, right? The problem with these is that they're all multi-instance. So you can totally craft inconsistencies in your assertions, right? If you
yeah, but I mean, you learn right away when you paint stuff in a weird way, and then the warnings start. You get warnings that don't make sense to you. Of like, I'm sorry, you appear to be running on Windows and not Windows at the same time. Please.
I can assure you that
please
Jeff,
deal with this.
Booyah, and me were staring at the current attributions for methods, and we weren't sure whether they were correct or sound either. So like it's you can totally create like world where that's I'm not sure that's actually true. That it's trivial to understand, because the thing is, you like the amount of flow state you have to like think through is actually quite significant to do that. So that's what I'm saying. Like, I mean, I'm not saying we cannot support the bool. I'm just saying I'm not convinced we can without potentially opening the door for unsound configuration. I mean, of course, we can analyze that as well, right? You could say, be there with a meta analyzer that checks whether your supported REST platform guard attribution is sound, right? But that might not be trivial to author either.
Right. I mean, ignore the compiler doing a lot of over analyzing for you. If you wrote is thread start supported and is single threaded and wrote one of them as negative the other, you can still paint both of them with contradicting things, and you can AND them together and learn contradicting things. So
Totally.
you're still in that same state, but yeah, I think that there's value in adding the Boolean. I agree it is marginal value, and if we want to punt it, that is fine. I just wanted to make sure we thought about it, and I think that we've thought about it for long enough.
Yep, I think that's totally fair.
So on to another question. It occurs to me that it would be really nice if I could say, is HTTP3 supported? And then on my method that uses HTTP3, I can just say, requires guard is HTTP3 supported, rather than having this, these attributes duplicated essentially everywhere I need to use them.
Yeah, so that one is a interesting question. So there's actually a spec, if you want to read it, I can post it in chat, where it kind of explored that venue, what that would look like. I call it a capability-based analyzer, basically. So the idea is that we can say, yeah, we invent some attribute. The attribute basically allows you to express what the guarding property is, and then you apply that attribute, and then basically the call side will get a flag if you didn't do that. I think the problem with I think we have to make a decision like what we promote, right? Because the problem now is if you have both capability-based checks and OS checks, they clearly intersect, right? If you look at Booyah's feature here, the idea here is we have these internal fields that kind of do the feature checking, and we just want to make sure that when you check for the feature, we still know what that means in terms of platforms, so we don't have to now also attribute every single thing with these capability checks. And you're kind of asking the reverse now. Like, you're basically saying, well, I want my callers not to do OS checks. I want my callers to check the capability, which I think is fair. I think that's the original reason why I wrote the capability-based spec, because the idea here is, what if the OS matrix changes over time, right? We don't want callers to add new conditions to their guard clauses. We just want them to write one guard and just be done with it, right? And I think that's kind of the world we maneuvered ourselves in here a little bit. I feel like what this analyzer was really meant to solve is OS-specific functionality, right? I think as we start using this analyzer for features that are cross-platform and the support changes, I don't think the platform support analyzer makes a whole lot of sense, to be honest, because I feel like at that point you basically now force all the callers to do 20 different OS checks, right, over time, right? And I think that's the wrong pattern.
I hear that.
HTTP3 is going in that direction because, yeah, as you said, we want people to check for HTTP3. They shouldn't have to know about what OSs HTTP3 is supported in, right? They just know, I call the feature, I use the feature that requires HTTP3, so I have to check for that feature.
Yeah,
but I think that's a different analyzer.
Yeah, this specific API I think will work. The main, I guess there's a problem with this today also, in that if you have many methods that are only supported on certain OSs, and let's say we add support to iOS for HTTP3, then we have to go and update all of those methods.
Yeah. I don't
instead
think
of just the one property.
Yeah, I don't quite think that the HTTP3 scenario is probably likely to get used. I think probably a single OS assertion is going to be more likely because, yeah, as you mentioned, as soon as you say a fourth one is supported, now you're going to get warnings on all the I'm painted as the three things that we previously had, and that really it's just more for the like, oh, I know browser doesn't work, or browser is in my list of OSs I'm not. So maybe the I know I'm nots would really be multi painted, but the I expect, based on how the things interact and how much painting you would have to do, that you're really only going to do it for, oh, I know I'm Linux now. Once you can get down to one, then you'll be like, this is a substitute for an OS platform check. But I mean, I could be wrong. It's my guess on how much complex downstream painting you have to do once you get into the OR mode.
Yeah, I guess it occurs to me that this can become kind of infectious in that if you have it in, middle tier APIs, you might have to then annotate all the way up the call stack.
Yeah, and I feel, again, that's where the feature flag may be at a high-level API, and then you're going to probably just ignore it in middle layers, and then when you get to the end and you're doing your p invokes, you're going to be like, well, whatever, I'm palled. Like, I'm already conditionally compiled. I know this is sound. Fine, debug assert, I'm Windows. And then you just move on.
I mean, in fairness, though, like that problem exists in both, right? Because they're both equally viral. It's just that do you attribute the OS matrix or do you attribute the capability, right? But they both have the same.
Yeah, they're both viral. In
one
one case, you'd update it
stable.
in one spot, and in another case, you have to update
Exactly.
all of the call sites.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, so
I probably should start writing some meta document on that because I feel like the OS support checks now, I think we abuse them too much for cross-platform features where it just becomes a pain in the ass.
yeah, like it makes sense when something is I work on one OS once, or I work everywhere but these named places. Okay, do we? Yeah. So I understand method, I understand property, I understand field. Does the guard really make sense on an a enum, which I think is enum member?
It could. Let's say you have your p invoking on into an API, and one of the flags is only supported on a current version of Windows. We see this with WinHTTP today, in our WinHTTP handler.
Right, but would that mean it has to be a flags based enum and you tested the bit, and if it's not flags that you tested for equality, like this, the enum, the point where the guard is allowing this to come in, I understand not the guard, but the current restriction of this enum member only makes sense if I'm on Windows. But this enum member tells me I'm on Windows, that feels, I don't know how this fits in any programmatic model. I don't see where you would say this bit makes Windows happen and how the flow analyzer is going to know that bit mattered. So I think we maybe want to get rid of attribute target enum on the guard.
Yeah, I see that. I think I agree. If someone is using an enum for that, they can just create a bool property off of it.
Yeah, they can write the Boolean property that does the bit test or equality check themselves.
Okay.
So just to clarify, enum does not mean enum member. Enum means literally the enum type. So if you wanted to apply to enum member, you have to say attribute target field,
which is already here. And okay,
yeah.
So I really don't know what this would mean then, because a type can't
Yeah.
You can't check a return value for a type.
Yeah.
Yeah. So enum should not be there.
Okay. Why is the guard extending the current attribute? That feels wrong.
I mean, that's kind of more, I guess, a style thing. The idea, I think, originally was that all the OS platform attributes are derived from that, so you can have a central place in the docs.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Doesn't really do
this
anything
is
else
not.
beyond that.
I read this as supported OS platform guard was extending supported OS platform. OS platform you have just as a is just a marker in your docs. It's not the.
Yeah.
Okay. So
Yeah, it does
then
nothing.
it doesn't matter. Okay, so the only thing we're doing is removing enum from the attribute targets.
Yep. Then I had two other things to add in just for verification here. I feel like months back I had a scenario in my head where I could think of a parameterized method that I would want to call and have it dynamically produce assert. But I've lost that fleeting example. Did that come up? I joined like halfway through. Did that come up? Could anybody else think of a case where we would want a parameterized guard method?
We certainly only talked about stateless, or we didn't talk about parameters and what they would mean. But I don't know that it would matter, because it's if this method returned true, you've learned the following. You don't care what parameters went into it. You're in the block or you're not.
Okay.
I mean, you could imagine a case, right, like directory delete recursively, right, where you can, currently you have no way of saying, if you call the method with false, it works everywhere. If you call the method with true, it only works on Windows or something, right? But we have basically given up on modeling that, because it gets very quickly very complicated, because now what you're really saying is certain inputs to this method require certain operating system support, and that gets very quickly very complicated, where it's like, well, this combination of flags and this thing null, or this thing not null, and this combination of enum values, and it's just you can't express aesthetically anymore, right? I mean, the other example we had was I think named pipes, where if you call the method with a non-null string, it only works on Windows. If you don't give it a name, it works everywhere, or something like that. And we just don't have a good way to do that statically. I think for configuration values for enums, we just said, well, if an enum value is only supported on Windows, well, then we can clearly articulate that by just marking that enum member. And so when you dereference the enum member, well, clearly you can do this on all platforms, but usually you would use it to actually configure your connection string or something. And in that case, you get a warning at the use side of the enum member, which is probably good enough. We can't do this with Booleans, right? Because, or you can only express true on Windows. That would be a bit draconian, maybe. But I think for those cases, we said if we really want to do this, we just have an analyzer, a custom analyzer that just looks at that thing and say sorry. But so far, nobody was feeling strongly enough about these things.
Okay. Cool. And then, Booyah, kind of question for you. I just put a link to one of the scenarios in the chat here of a place where this had surfaced, where we had a combination of Linux and then narrowing Android away from Linux. I just wanted to get kind of confirmation from you. You think this design also addresses that scenario of being able to wrap that in, or create a guard method to capture that scenario?
Hopefully the flow analysis could cover it. I will check that. I mean, I will add the test for that. But
okay, cool. And I think it would be a combination of supported Linux,
yep,
supported Windows, supported Mac OS, unsupported Android. Cool. All right, thank you. Those are my two things.
All right. I think I summarized a 40-minute conversation down into that one sentence. Did I miss anything?
Looks good to me.
thanks.
Whew. Oops. I just closed the wrong window.
Are you with us, Aaron?
One day.
I can ping him real quick.
Track native. Oh yeah.
All right. To follow my normal style, we have a new blocking issue, low-level API support for Objective-C scenarios, issue number 44659er, if we can get someone to talk about it.
I've tagged Aaron, waiting for a response.
At least I assume he's the one who marked it blocking. Yep.
I can do the read async one if it's next.
All right.
Yeah, I'll probably be the one who ends up implementing this if it's approved. So the basic concept here is pipe readers are used a lot for parsing. A lot of things that you parse end up being length prefixed. And today, if you're awaiting like, a certain amount of data in like a message pack payload or like an HTTP2 frame, every time the writer writes data, it wakes up the reader, assuming it hasn't examined the data yet, which is, every new write that's the case. Even if the reader already knows that it doesn't care about the data until it receives a certain amount. So today, I think if you scroll down, there's basically what will be the default implementation of this method. There's a lot of stuff in here. Sorry. A lot of conversation. But the default implementation on the pipe reader will not return until enough data is available. So that will end up, so it's one of my comments that it might be the very bottom.
Essentially, you'll just have a loop. Yeah.
Yep. So that will be the default implementation, but the idea of making this new virtual method is that, so if, you have an abstract pipe reader, right? And then you have the default pipe reader, which is what's created when you new up a pipe and use .reader. In the default reader, it will be more optimized. So it doesn't schedule kind of the read loop at all until there's at least min bytes remaining, or the read is canceled, or the pipe is complete. And we're not checking is canceled is complete because I wasn't as thorough as I should have been in that sample, but we would.
Right, because even if it is reading, this minimum is, it will return less than that if the thing goes into a terminal state.
Yes. So the reader will have to be cognizant of that.
Right. Yeah, so to be clear, when you say terminal state, I assume you mean EOF, right?
Yeah, I didn't know how pipes actually close, so I was vague.
There are two states where it could return early. So to get to that, it's the EOF is the one for sure, where we return early with less than the amount of data, but you can still examine it. And then the other thing is if cancel pending read is called. And that's usually used for kind of like janitorial kind of work. Like basically sometimes the read loop might want to exit early or check for timeouts or do some random thing. And regardless of the data that's there, we basically want to wake up the read loop.
Okay. So one piece of feedback I have is that since it has a attribute that should, or a parameter that should be validated, that it should use the template method pattern. So derived types don't need to write if minimum bytes is less than some number throw. 0 is presumably legal, but
I see.
So it's
like
just
read async internal or read
async core.
internal. Yeah.
You mentioned that this part of this is an optimization. How large of minimum bytes are you expecting here? Because typically when you wait for a read, you get, like a kilobytes of data at a time.
Right. So in Kestrel, it often ends up being 4 kilobytes at a time because that's the size of our read buffer. There certainly can be like prefixes longer than that. We've gone this long in Kestrel without it, and certainly for like JSON and plain text tech and power benchmarks, it makes no difference whatsoever. But
I guess my question is, you have that loop there. How often do you actually expect to loop there? I would expect the majority of cases it never loops a second time, right?
It really depends on how big length prefixes are. So for HP2, I'd have to like double check what the max frame size is, but that would be like an example, and that's far more than 4K. I'm pretty sure. That's modifiable via like the settings frames and stuff, right? But I'm just thinking about Kestrel defaults. Regardless, it does depend on the scenario. Could be a lot if there's a really long length prefix, but in the vast majority of the cases, we get all the data we need in a single read, at least in the things that we heavily benchmark.
All right, so the reader already knows, like the current read async just takes a cancellation token. So obviously it reads into a place that it already knows how to read. So this is really just block the read until the read result would be big enough or one of the other terminal conditions happens.
Yeah, so for a little more context, oftentimes, we end up having to thread pool dispatch and stuff because we're ultimately like giving the data to user code and stuff. In this particular stuff where we're in the parsing loop, it's often in line, but it's still like extra work when we can just very quickly not dispatch if we know how much data the reader is expecting.
Right.
And if there is a thread pool scheduler, then it's even more valuable.
And I guess the try read can't really gain a minimum thing because you can't implement that in a default way.
We could have it return false for try read if we really wanted to, but that's not something we're super interested in at the moment.
Yeah, it would
like
be
take min bytes and return false.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, well, because if what you interpreted it as is I'm going to keep going to sleep until try read minimum 1024 returns true, then the default behavior would be that you never got into that state. So it's probably weirder to add it than.
Agreed.
Like we need like supports limited or supports. We need a supports for that method, and it's probably not worth it. Just call the wait until you're done. All right. Is bytes the right thing? Are pipes bytes?
Yeah, very byte centric.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think just having an overload on read async makes sense. Like, what else would it mean there? And it has a name.
Yeah, I'm fine with that. Unless, I mean, if someone wants to disagree, speak up. Otherwise, it'd be read minimum async. But I think that the minimum is fine. It is.
I think I've seen read at least in some C++ library. I can't remember what.
Yeah, you could. That's what I named it in my sample, and then I didn't throw an async on there because it's just a sample. There's a, but yeah, so read at least async would be, I guess, the second best in my mind. I'd rather just be read async.
Yeah, boost ASIO and possibly the C++ networking TS uses at least.
Yes, but many of, or I guess C++ allows overloading, but if it was C, then it's you don't have overloading, so you needed a name for why it's different. But
I guess the only reason to give this a different name is that changing the first parameter type always kind of sucks for IntelliSense.
yes, but it's also async. The only attribute or the only parameter is a cancellation token, which we say is always last. So
yeah.
I mean, I think
fine.
it's more discoverable if you call it read at least async. Otherwise, if I'm looking at if I have my little IntelliSense and I look at my drop down of things I can do, I see, oh, I can read async. Well, I already know how to do that, and it's only going to be when I actually get around to looking at the different overloads that I say, oh, wait, actually, there's an overload that kind of doesn't just read; it does read at least.
that's true. I guess it's also that Stream doesn't have this functionality, and so without the name throwing it in someone's face, it may not occur to them that Pipe Reader has the functionality, which I think is what Jeff's saying, just in a different way.
Yeah, Jeff convinced me actually. The IntelliSense argument, I can switch. I didn't feel that strongly, so if we want to do read at least async, let's do it.
And do we want at least or minimum?
I like at least.
Okay.
No, oh no, oh no, oh no. So Levi just wrote some stuff in the comments. I really want to hear what he has to say about this. He's like, I'm not in this meeting right now, but I just saw this pop up on stream. I think the scenario for this API leads the developer into a security pit of failure, which,
Presumably he's thinking of a developer assuming that it will always return at least X bytes, not accounting for EOF.
Maybe.
But I mean, I assume that existing read at leasts have that same. It's at least unless.
Yeah, it wouldn't make sense any other way.
I mean, we could certainly have it throw of like, I'm sorry, we hit a terminal condition, and I couldn't meet your read.
Yeah, and then I would call it read exact or something like that.
Yeah, the problem with that is then Kestrel couldn't use it,
right?
Because of cancel pending read.
Yeah, I don't think anyone would use it.
I mean,
I don't see how it would really be ambiguous because the sequence reader that you read from the pipe reader won't let you advance as far as you asked because it didn't actually get populated. So
a little more. Oh, sorry.
Well, I could see there being a problem. I could see someone making bad assumptions if this was, I'm giving you a buffer on the call. And then read at least 100 bytes, and it says I read 7, and you're like, well, I'm going to go process the first 100 bytes, and now I'm reading 93 bytes that were just garbage that was already in the buffer. But since this has a secondary guard of what state is the reader in, I assume Levi's comment is that he thinks it's the first pattern.
Yeah, I wonder. I think Levi probably does understand it. But there was a similar thing that came up in the pipe writer side. So when we first introduced the pipe writer to the BCL, get memory took a size hint instead of a minimum size. And then a lot of people treated it as if it was a minimum size, and it led to some errors, especially since there are like these unusual circumstances or somewhat unusual circumstances where we basically ignore the hint and give you a smaller buffer regardless. And we changed the contract for pipewriter.getMemory to be a true minimum instead of a hint. I don't know, like, you know, because these are like spans in memory and they do have bounds, it's not like, you know, a C buffer overflow, but like, you know, you do drop in unsafe code sometimes, right? Especially in Kestrel and so forth. Like, it's not impossible to overrun a buffer if you remove all the checks.
Right. I mean, so because the concern would be you called read at least, you know, 100, and that now you start having code that is reading data out of whatever buffer it would have been written to, since read writes, and that you now feel that you don't need to do any checking for the first 100 because that's what you passed in. But if you still have to ask the sequence reader for, hey, give me the chunk of memory that was written to, and it doesn't give you past the 7 that this returned, then I think you're fine, because you would just get you would get a bounds error instead of a dirty memory read. And
I agree with you. I mean, I like the API still. I just wanted to,
right.
I mean, after seeing that comment from Levi, I definitely respect, you know, his opinions on all things security and so forth.
Yeah.
The only other thing I could think of is, you know, if you're not checking what you're parsing and a frame says that it's 2 gigabytes in size and you just blindly pass 2 gigabytes to this and it just hangs for a while. But you kind of have that issue in current code already. I guess it's just a little more explicit in current code.
That's fair. I guess that could be the other angle that he is concerned about. So, without him being here to talk about it, if we talk about this from an API perspective instead of from a feature perspective, I think we've finished the API, but that Levi may want to make a follow-up move to kill the feature.
Yeah, I think it's fair to approve.
So
And
just
I'll
approved
schedule a
with follow-up
with Levi.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Noted. Did we get Aaron?
Okay, so we need to schedule a dedicated API review session for that one.
Okay.
Aaron feels it's going to be a long one, and it's going to need the entire Interop team and David Wrighton for it. So we probably want to do that for Thursday or Friday if we're still doing backlog, and otherwise just a full 1 to 2 hour session next Tuesday.
Okay.
Makes sense.
So we have 10 minutes. I assert this one is a 10-minute issue. All right. Put on your Stone Age hats and think back to .NET Framework 1.1 before generics existed, and you had typed collections. Okay. X509 Certificate 2 collection, and to a lesser extent X509 Certificate collection, are typed collections. I don't know why the 2 collection didn't use generics, because it was introduced in the same release as generics. But a lot of code gets written that basically, or if you try to use link, you end up having to do an of type or a cast or something to turn the soft typed collection into something link understands. Steve suggests we just go ahead and make the change now to say it is, you know, IEnumerable or IEnumerator of the generic. there are some tiny edge cases. We don't care.
I
Looks
remember
good to me.
we did something similar with the regex class, like the match class or match collection, and it created an ambiguity in an overload that previously worked. Does anyone remember that? Okay.
I mean, you always have the chance of providing ambiguities if you've got something that takes either an IEnumerator or an IEnumerator of X509 chain element, given that previously it would pick one and now it will pick, now it won't know which one to pick. But I feel that's enough of an edge case that users can fix that on
Yeah,
when
I
they
agree.
upgrade.
Yeah, the fact that nothing right now, like nothing takes IEnumerable of X509 certificate 2 because the collection type we use for it is not that. So I don't think there's any API that would be confused. It's just not a thing.
Makes
Like
sense.
only the collection type's always specified richly. This is mainly about helping Link. And we did talk about, and I think he looked at iCollection of T because they are collection, but these things do end up in some weird states with like add that sometimes they allow add that shouldn't fit in the return type, and then it, if you write the for each using type coercion, which is what everybody does, then that blows up at that cast, which is why we felt that the enumerable was good enough. So, all right.
Looks good.
And of course, if something breaks, we'll back it out. Grr, now I need to copy this. Now, yes, and apparently I had some notes. But that's implementation, not... All right, if anybody thinks that they have an issue that is literally that fast, we can talk about it. Otherwise, we get 5 minutes back today.
I don't have an issue, but we also need to schedule the backlog item for the initial generic math preview review, now that we're done with the blocking issues.
Are we done with the blocking issues, or is it just that we haven't marked everything yet?
Just Jeremy, or just Aaron's is left.
Yeah, because the diff
Yes,
is
it
no
seems
longer
like we should.
0.
Yeah, it seems like we should schedule the Objective C one then for either this week or next week, depending on whether the team can make it, and then we can use the other slot for the generic math one.
Yeah.
All right.
All right. I will do that.
There we go. Now we got pretty green lines back. Comment, approve, and all right. So Emo will take care of some scheduling things because he's a master of scheduling. And hey, look, aside from a thing that got painted during the meeting, we finished the reds and did 2 things that weren't red.
Hooray!
All right. So
We've,
when are we next?
left that security thing for you to discuss on the issue.
I just came in. What did I miss?
We approved it with, if you feel like arguing that the feature shouldn't exist, that can certainly be done later.
Oh, no. It was just a, I'm sorry I wasn't able to type more in the chat. It was just a, like, hey, if you're parsing an untrusted TLB header, like, do you want the attacker to specify the length type thing?
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's...
Like, that we have an API that now encourages that coding pattern, which makes me a bit anxious.
Fair enough. Well, work that out with
There's so many
Stefan and
prefix
see how we
protocols.
feel. All right, so according to my schedule, it looks like our next meeting is in 48 plus 22 hours. So 10 a.m. Thursday, Redmond time. See everyone then.
Bye bye.